In 2014, two Princeton researchers published a study that broke something fundamental about how we understand democracy. Martin Gilens and Benjamin Page analyzed 1,779 policy decisions made over 20 years. Not opinions, not polling, actual legislative outcomes. They wanted to answer one question. In America, whose preferences actually determine what becomes law? The results were impossible. When economic elites supported a policy, it passed about 45% of the time. When they opposed it, it failed. Clean correlation. When average citizens supported a policy, even when 80% of the public wanted it, the statistical effect on whether it passed was near zero. Not reduced, not weakened. Statistically indistinguishable from random chance. Your opinion as an ordinary citizen has no detectable influence on what your government does. Read the study yourself. The methodology is bulletproof. The conclusion is unavoidable. America's policy outcomes reflect the preferences of economic elites, not the majority of citizens. This shouldn't be possible in a democracy. But here's what's truly disturbing. This exact pattern has happened before, and someone predicted exactly how it would happen over 2,300 years ago. Aristotle wasn't a philosopher in the modern sense. He was a political scientist before the field existed. Between 335 and 323 BCE, he collected and analyzed the constitutions of 158 city-states across the Mediterranean world. He documented how they were structured, how they functioned, and crucially how they changed. He was looking for patterns, and he found something remarkable. Political systems transform into each other through predictable mechanisms, like chemical reactions, like weather systems. Once you understand the underlying forces, you can forecast the transformation. The most common pattern he observed, democracies becoming oligarchies from within, not through military coups, not through foreign conquest, through internal corruption so gradual, so systematic, that citizens often don't realize it's happening until it's complete. Aristotle watched this transformation happen in real time to the most famous democracy in the ancient world. Athens, 404 BCE. Athens had been a functioning democracy for over a century. Citizens assembled regularly to debate and vote on laws. Officials were chosen by lottery to prevent corruption. It wasn't perfect, women and slaves couldn't participate, but for free male citizens, it was genuine democratic governance. Then, Athens lost the Peloponnesian War. Sparta imposed terms: dismantle your navy, destroy your walls, and change your government. The Spartans, themselves an oligarchy, installed 30 men to draft a new constitution. They became known as the 30 Tyrants. Within 8 months, this is what they did. Restricted citizenship to 3,000 wealthy men. Everyone else lost all legal rights overnight. Then they began killing people and taking their property. Not for crimes, for wealth. Wealthy foreigners, successful merchants, prosperous landowners, anyone whose assets they wanted. They killed roughly 1,500 people, 5% of Athens' population, and distributed the confiscated wealth among themselves. They disbanded the Democratic Assembly, shut down the courts, prohibited public gatherings, executed anyone who spoke against them, including one of their own members when he suggested moderation. They claimed democracy had led Athens to defeat. Rule by the best people, meaning the wealthiest, would restore greatness. Aristotle studied this, and he identified the mechanism that made it possible. Democracy allows economic inequality while guaranteeing political equality. Once wealth becomes sufficiently concentrated, those with money discover they can convert economic power into political power, and once they control politics, they can restructure everything to extract more wealth. It's a feedback loop. Wealth to power to more wealth to more power. The transformation from democracy to oligarchy isn't a coup, it's a capture. The machinery of democracy remains, elections, debates, votes, but the outcomes serve a class fundamentally separate from the citizens. Aristotle called it the form of democracy with the content of oligarchy. 8 months after the 30 took power, a general named Thrasybulus led a democratic resistance. Started with 70 exiles in a mountain fortress. Within months, thousands joined. Even Sparta eventually recognized the oligarchy was unstable. Democracy was restored. But the pattern was complete. Aristotle had watched democracy transform into oligarchy and back again. He spent the rest of his life documenting the mechanics of that transformation, and every mechanism he identified is operating in America right now. Let me show you how the first stage works. The 30 tyrants restricted citizenship to 3,000 wealthy men. Everyone else was excluded from power overnight. Modern oligarchy can't do that. You can't legally restrict who votes, but you can restrict who can run. Here's how. A competitive House race costs roughly $10 million. A Senate seat? Over $100 million. These aren't legal requirements. They're practical realities created by the cost of advertising, staff, polling, and voter contact. If you can't raise these amounts, you don't become a viable candidate. Voters never even see your name on the ballot. You're filtered out before democracy begins. Now, you might think, rich people have always had advantages in politics. That's not new. But in 2010, something changed. Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission. The Supreme Court ruled that limiting campaign spending violates the First Amendment. Money is speech, the court said. Corporations are people. Therefore, corporations and individuals can spend unlimited amounts on elections. The effect was immediate. In 2024, 150 billionaire families spent nearly $2 billion on federal elections. Elon Musk personally spent $290 million, more than entire presidential campaigns cost a generation ago. They're not buying votes directly. They're doing something more sophisticated. They fund primary challenges to remove uncooperative politicians. They finance think tanks that determine which ideas seem serious. They own media outlets that decide what's newsworthy. They define the boundaries of acceptable political discourse. By the time you vote, the options have been filtered through wealth. You still vote. Elections are still free and fair, but you're choosing between candidates pre-approved by concentrated wealth. The outcomes are constrained within boundaries that wealth has already established. This is the modern version of restricting citizenship to 3,000 wealthy elites. You exercise choice without exercising power. The extraction. The 30 tyrants used political power to confiscate property. Modern oligarchy is more elegant. Instead of direct seizure, they restructure the economy through policy. Watch what happened in 2008, the clearest modern example of oligarchic wealth extraction. Major banks made catastrophically reckless bets with other people's money. They packaged mortgages they knew were bad, sold them as safe investments, then bet against them. When the bets failed, the financial system collapsed. Millions of families lost their homes, lost their savings, lost their jobs. The people who caused this received $700 billion in taxpayer bailouts. Citigroup lost $18.7 billion in 2008 and needed $45 billion in government rescue to survive. That same year, they paid 738 employees bonuses of at least $1 million each. Merrill Lynch lost $27 billion. They paid 696 employees bonuses of at least $1 million. Let that sink in. The year these companies needed taxpayer rescue to avoid collapse, they paid out billions in bonuses to the same people who destroyed them. One senior banker went to prison for the entire crisis. Meanwhile, families who lost their homes were lectured about personal responsibility. They should have read the fine print, should have made better choices. This is wealth extraction through policy. Not crude confiscation, but systematic restructuring that transfers wealth upward while appearing technical and neutral. Tax cuts for the wealthy, deregulation, subsidy structures, bailouts. Each adjustment seems small and technical. Collectively, they reorganize the entire economy. The CEO to worker pay ratio shows the cumulative effect. 1965, 21 to 1. Today, 344 to 1. Worker productivity more than doubled in that period. Workers produce more than ever. But that ratio doesn't measure productivity, it measures extraction. The 30 tyrants confiscated property and distributed it among themselves. Modern oligarchy restructures the economy so wealth flows automatically upward, then calls it a free market. The cage. But here's the question: why don't people just organize and demand something different? Aristotle had an answer. He called humans zoon politikon, political animals. He meant something specific. We're built for collective life, for organizing together, deliberating about shared problems, acting collectively to shape our world. Individual humans are powerless against concentrated power. One person can't change Amazon, can't regulate banks, can't shift policy. But humans organized collectively? Enormously powerful. Which means oligarchy's greatest threat is collective organization. The 30 tyrants disbanded the Democratic Assembly and prohibited gatherings. They understood that democratic power comes from people recognizing shared interests and acting collectively. Modern oligarchy achieves the same result through two mechanisms working together. First, destroy the spaces where people could organize. In 1954, 35% of American workers belonged to unions. Unions weren't just about wages, they were spaces where working people gathered regularly, recognized shared interests, learned to organize, exercised collective power. Today, 10%. Private sector, 6%. When Amazon workers tried to organize at their Staten Island warehouse, Amazon spent $14.2 million on anti-union consultants in a single year. They held mandatory meetings where workers were lectured about the dangers of unions. Workers who organized were fired. The workers won their union vote anyway. 2,654 in favor, 2,131 against. Amazon refused to recognize the union. 3 years later, they're still fighting for their first contract through legal challenges and appeals. This is the modern version of disbanding the assembly. Not prohibition, exhaustion. Second, destroy the economic independence that would let people risk resistance. Aristotle identified the middle class as the foundation of stable democracy. They're too numerous to be bought off, too invested in stability to want revolution, and their interests naturally align with broadly distributed prosperity, which is why oligarchy must prevent a strong middle class from existing. The mechanism? Debt. In 1970, a single middle-class income could support a family. House, car, healthcare, education, retirement savings. By 2020, two incomes struggle to maintain the same standard. Student debt exceeds $1.7 trillion. British graduates average £45,000 in debt. Housing costs have exploded relative to wages across every developed democracy. Here's the political function of debt that Aristotle would have recognized immediately. When you owe £50,000 in student loans, you need your job desperately. You cannot risk challenging your employer. You cannot risk organizing. You cannot risk getting fired when termination means financial catastrophe. Debt transforms free citizens into dependents who cannot risk resistance. Ancient Rome used the same mechanism. Small farmers went into debt, lost their land, became dependent on wealthy patrons. That dependence prevented them from acting collectively to defend the republic. The oligarchs who engineered this eventually installed emperors. Modern oligarchy combines both mechanisms: destroy the spaces where people could organize, and destroy the economic independence that would let them risk organizing anyway. The result? Isolated individuals who interpret systematic problems as personal failures. When you're alone with your struggle, you don't recognize patterns. You blame yourself. You feel ashamed. You suffer in isolation. But when people connect and compare experiences, personal failures reveal themselves as systematic design. The inversion. There's one more piece, the psychological masterpiece that makes the entire system seem natural. The 30 tyrants claimed rule by the best people would restore Athens to greatness after democratic failures. Modern oligarchy does the same thing, but the ideology is more sophisticated. Meritocracy. The claim, wealth indicates merit. Having money means you're smarter, more hardworking, more disciplined, more valuable. Therefore, Poverty indicates inferiority, laziness, poor choices, moral failure. Once this framework is accepted, oligarchic extraction doesn't feel like exploitation. It feels like natural order. The wealthy deserve bailouts when their recklessness threatens the system because they're important. Too big to fail. Job creators. Their success benefits everyone. The poor deserve to suffer the consequences of their struggles because they're inadequate. Should have worked harder. Made better choices. Here's what the actual data shows. Your zip code at birth predicts your adult outcomes more powerfully than your intelligence, education, or work ethic. Economic mobility in America ranks among the lowest in the developed world. The system is designed to reproduce inequality across generations. But the ideology claims outcomes reflect individual merit. This is the final mechanism, not just capturing democracy and extracting wealth and preventing resistance, but restructuring justice itself so the extraction seems deserved. When this inversion is complete, oligarchy doesn't need to justify itself. It seems like the natural order of a just world. The oligarchic transformation Aristotle identified is complete. Wealth has captured the political system through campaign finance. Power is used to restructure the economy for extraction. Resistance is prevented through destroyed organizing spaces and economic dependence. And justice has been inverted to make it all seem natural. The Princeton study measured the outcome. Ordinary citizens have no detectable influence on policy. You see it now. But Aristotle's pattern has one more stage. Athens didn't stay oligarchic. Democracy was restored. Thrasybulus led 70 exiles to a mountain fortress. Within months, thousands joined, former soldiers, laborers, citizens who remembered what democracy felt like. The 30 sent their forces. Thrasybulus held. His ranks kept growing. Eventually, even Sparta recognized the oligarchy was unstable. Democracy returned after 8 months. What made restoration possible wasn't individual heroism. It was collective recognition and collective action. The isolated farmer, the lone merchant, the individual craftsman, each was powerless. But when they recognized each other and organized collectively, they were formidable. In 2018, West Virginia teachers were struggling. Stagnant wages, impossible healthcare costs, many working second jobs. They started connecting through Facebook groups. Within days, thousands discovered they were experiencing identical struggles. Within weeks, 20,000 teachers organized a statewide strike. Every public school shut down. The government was forced to negotiate. The strike succeeded. The capacity for collective power was always there. Isolation just prevented it from becoming actionable. The moment connection formed, power emerged. Power doesn't live in isolated individuals voting in pre-filtered elections. Power lives in people recognizing each other and organizing collectively around shared interests. You cannot dismantle oligarchy alone. That's the point of the isolation. That's why the cage was built. But you're not alone. Millions are experiencing the same systematic extraction, the same isolation, the same inverted justice. Stop blaming yourself for systematic failures. Your struggle isn't personal inadequacy, it's systematic design. Find the others. Thrasybulus led 70 exiles and restored Athenian democracy. The West Virginia teachers started with Facebook groups and shut down an entire state. The Amazon workers organized through cookouts and won against a $1 trillion company. The cage is real. The isolation is systematic. The mechanisms are sophisticated beyond anything historical oligarchies could achieve. But political animals have broken out of every cage ever built. Not easily, not quickly, not without cost. But because we cannot flourish in isolation, organizing collectively isn't just political strategy. It's the only path to human flourishing. The system Aristotle predicted has been built. The pattern he identified is complete. The question is what happens when political animals recognize both the cage and each other. If this analysis helped you see the pattern, share it with someone else who needs to see it too. The algorithm won't do it for us. And in the comments, tell me what you recognized. Where do you see these mechanisms operating in your life? What examples did I miss? This only works if we compare notes. That's what political animals do. We recognize each other.